Did you hear they replaced the snack fridge with a wellness hub that only stocks celery water and kombucha? Sarah muttered, her voice bouncing off the sterile glass walls of her office like a whisper in a mausoleum. No one answered, not because they didn't hear, but because no one talked anymore. At least not without scheduling it 2 days in advance via Outlook and calling it a collaboration sync. 15 years, that's how long she'd been the spine of Innovate Solutions. Not some cog in the machine, but bone and tendon, part of the actual skeleton that kept the company upright when its knees buckled during the 2009 crash, when its CEO had a nervous breakdown in 2013, and during that god-awful rebrand in 2016 that turned their logo into a blue gradient turd. She'd been here before there was an HR department, before the espresso machine. For key fobs, she had helped code their first client dashboard while sitting on a yoga ball in a garage that reeked of burnt pizza and ambition. Now she was sitting in what looked like a cross between a spa and a minimum security prison, one of OmniCorp's focus pods, equipped with sound-dampening walls and emotion-dampening lighting. The carpet was so soft it felt hostile, like it was hiding something. The merger had officially closed last Tuesday. OmniCorp had absorbed Innovate Solutions like a python swallowing a hamster. Slow, suffocating, inevitable. There'd been cupcakes, of course, dry, overly frosted ones that tasted like wet printer paper and forced celebration. There'd been speeches, too, executives from OmniCorp talking about unlocking mutual potential, harmonizing verticals, and onboarding synergy, as if they were programming a spaceship, not dismantling the human fabric of a company. Sarah had clapped politely with everyone else, but the pit in her stomach had formed right there, between unlocking and synergy. She knew a hit job when she heard one. This wasn't a merger, it was a gutting. A purge with a smile. That morning, a fresh-faced baby in all birds and arrogance had knocked on her glass. He had the kind of face that looked like it had never known a poor decision or a bad haircut. "Hey, Sarah, right?" he asked, stepping in without waiting for a yes. "I'm the senior project manager for infrastructure and platform migration," she said, enunciating each word like a scalpel. Her tone said, "Don't waste my time, Junior." "Oh, wow, okay, awesome. So do you, actually still use Jenkins? We're thinking about consolidating into Azure for, continuity." She blinked, once, slowly. "Do I still use Jenkins?" she repeated, like a priest forced to say the name of a demon. Nodded with the smug enthusiasm of someone who'd once Googled how to talk to technical people. "Yeah, we're just evaluating resource redundancies and trying to eliminate friction." "Friction," she echoed, her voice flat. "Got it." The kid, his badge said Reese, OmniCorp Integration Team, like he was the brand ambassador for colonoscopy, gave her finger guns and strolled out, muttering something into his Apple Watch. She turned back to her dual monitors, where 2 weeks ago she'd been overseeing a multi-million-dollar cross-platform deployment. Today, she was reviewing a PDF titled OmniCorp Integration Policy, Final PDF. It read like a dystopian constitution, pages of legal clauses that boiled down to, "You're ours now. Everything you were, everything you built, irrelevant." One paragraph stood out. "All employment agreements previously governed by Innovate Solutions shall be considered null and void upon completion of merger, and replaced by OmniCorp's standard at-will employment policies, effective immediately." Sarah exhaled slowly. There it is, the opening shot, not with a meeting or a conversation or even a warning. Just a PDF with dead language and fine print, quietly erasing everything she had helped build. Her phone buzzed. Calendar invite from change management. 15 minutes. No agenda listed. That wasn't ominous at all. She leaned back in her chair, which still bore the imprint of 11 years of late nights and back pain, and let her eyes drift across the office. The Innovate Solutions team, the old guard, the people who used to share beers after product launches and memes during deployment weekends, now sat stiff and quiet, their screens glowing like pale tombstones. Newer folks, the ones from OmniCorp, moved like they already owned the place. They didn't make eye contact. They didn't need to. Her gaze drifted to the bottom drawer of her desk. She reached down and pulled it open. There, nestled between a tangle of USB-C chargers and a stress ball shaped like a server rack, was the leather-bound folio Dave had given her 13 years ago. It was embossed in gold, old-school elegance in a sea of cloud-based nothingness. She hadn't looked at it in years, but now something pulled at her. Back then, Dave had handed it over with that dopey grin of his, "You're one of the originals," he'd said like he was knighting her. "I added a clause in there. Might sound weird, but if anything ever happens, like we get acquired or something stupid, this clause makes sure they can't screw you. It's not standard, but you're not standard." She had laughed, shoved it in a drawer, and never thought about it again. Until now, till she read that one line in the PDF, null and void. A calendar reminder pinged, 10 minutes. Sarah stared at the folio, then at the email. Then at the door where a laminated poster with the phrase "One Omni, One Future" had been slapped over the old Innovate mission statement. Her stomach churned. Not with fear. Not quite. Something older, something darker, a knowing. She wasn't paranoid. She was next. And they were stupid enough not to know what she was holding. Past had come calling. And it had teeth. They held the town hall in what used to be the developer bullpen, once a chaotic, living organism of whiteboards, energy drinks, and shouted ideas. Now, it had been sterilized into an event space, complete with foldable chairs arranged with creepy precision, a branded step and repeat in the back corner, and a table of boxed water labeled hydration station. Someone had laid out Omnicorp stress cubes that looked like they were designed to crumble in your hand the moment you squeezed them, which, if intentional, was disturbingly on brand. Sarah sat in the third row, hands folded in her lap like she was back in Sunday school, but the sermon here came with less soul and more PowerPoint. The Omnicorp CEO strutted onto the makeshift stage like a cruise ship host, flanked by two younger executives who looked as if they'd been genetically engineered to wear lanyards. His name was Nathaniel something. She couldn't remember, but it hardly mattered. He was the type who used your first name 5 times in the first minute and smiled like he was selling you a reverse mortgage. "Let's talk about transformation," he began, clapping as if he expected applause. "We are so thrilled to welcome the Innovate family into the Omnicorp ecosystem. We're not just joining a company, you are joining a movement." Sarah stared at him, stone-faced. The only movement she could feel was the slow roll of nausea creeping up her throat. He launched into a sermon of buzzwords. Culture sync, process harmonization, cost-neutral restructuring, and his favorite, it seemed, synergistic redundancies. Every few sentences, he'd pause and nod solemnly, like a preacher waiting for someone to shout amen. No one did. Not a sound came from the Innovate team. Not even a cough. They sat frozen, their bodies present but their minds elsewhere, somewhere back when their work meant something, when their product roadmap hadn't been hijacked by suits who thought agile meant sending emails faster. She glanced to the side and caught sight of Dave, the founder who had once pitched their product with so much fire that investors signed checks just to shut him up. He was standing off to the right, shoulders hunched in a suit that didn't fit quite right, eyes glazed. A man who had once danced on tables after launch nights now looked like he'd been left in the rain. He wasn't speaking. He wasn't even introduced. He was there, but not present. Next to him stood a woman from Omnicorp Legal, whispering something into his ear, and he nodded with the slow dread of a man being walked to the gallows. And of course, Nathaniel continued, pulling up a garish slide that read Omnicorp Integration Strategy. The 90-day plan, we want to ensure alignment across all verticals. This includes evaluating our talent deployment to eliminate duplication and boost efficiency. There it was. The death knell dressed up like a motivational quote. Translation, we're firing people. We just haven't picked your name yet. The younger execs smiled like wolves. Sarah could see it now, the game plan. First, charm them, gut them, and when the old-timers balked, smile and say, we value your legacy, but we're building the future. When Nathaniel finally stepped down, after a painfully awkward icebreaker where he asked everyone to name one thing they love about change, the crowd dispersed in silence. A few Omnicorp employees clapped. Nobody else did. No one dared speak the first word afterward, like breaking the quiet would invite the axe. Back at her desk, Sarah found a new email in her inbox. Subject: Policy Update Omnicorp Employment Handbook V7.1 Attachment. Onboarding HR Omnicorp PDF. She opened it, half expecting to see her termination date already filled in. The document was thick with corporate nonsense, but one line stood out like a knife in the ribs. All previous employment agreements, contracts, and incentive plans shall be deemed void as of acquisition close date. Employment is now governed under the at-will policies outlined herein. She read it again and again. Her hands didn't shake yet, but her jaw did clench, hard enough that her molars groaned. They thought they'd covered everything, wiped the slate clean, erased her contract with one generic clause written by some overpaid drone who'd never set foot in this building. Except they hadn't. Not completely, because Sarah's original contract wasn't just a PDF signed in DocuSign and forgotten. It wasn't digital. It wasn't standard. It was leather-bound. It was weird. And it was real. She stood up slowly, ignoring the chime of another incoming email, some morale-boosting invite to OmniCorp Spirit Week. Wear green on Thursday, because nothing says we value your humanity like color-coded uniforms. She walked past the break room where a new touchscreen coffee machine had replaced her trusty bun brewer. Past the IT desk where Jerome, the one engineer still hanging on by a thread, was quietly uninstalling root access from his own machine. Past the poster that now covered the hallway wall, one Omni, one goal, one future. A future that didn't seem to have room for her. Yet. But Sarah was starting to remember things, and they were about to remember her. Started with a calendar ping. Just a little ding, an invite with no subject line, no agenda, no context. Just a room number, 3C East. Sarah had never been in 3C East. In fact, she wasn't entirely sure it had existed before OmniCorp's arrival. It wasn't on the old floor plan. Probably some broom closet they'd converted into a private consultation space during the cultural gutting. Her mouse hovered over the decline button for half a second. Instinct told her this wasn't optional. When she arrived, the room was already occupied. 2 chairs on one side of the table, one on the other. It was cold, too cold, not metaphorically, literally. The AC was blasting like the room was hiding spoiled meat. The man sitting across from the solo chair wore a gray suit and an even grayer expression. He didn't rise to greet her. His hands were folded neatly over a manila folder. He looked at her like she was a customer returning expired produce without a receipt. Next to him sat a woman from HR, OmniCorp HR, not Innovate HR. Sarah had never seen her before, but she wore the practiced tight smile of someone trained to look sympathetic while pulling the trigger. "Sarah Monroe?" the man asked, though he clearly already knew. She nodded, sitting down without being asked. "I'm Randall Pierce, Vice President of Operational Realignment." That wasn't a job, that was a threat wearing a tie. He cleared his throat and gestured toward the folder like it might leap up and explain itself. "We've been conducting a role evaluation across both legacy teams and have identified certain redundancies." Sarah didn't blink, she didn't move. The silence dared him to be specific. Randall shifted in his seat. "Your position has been deemed an unfortunate overlap." There it was. The axe, dull and indifferent, slid the folder across the table like it was a napkin. "In accordance with OmniCorp severance guidelines, you'll receive 2 weeks base pay, prorated vacation, and COBRA continuation options. The package also includes a standard non-disparagement clause, which will need signed within 5 business days." The HR woman chimed in. "We understand this may come as a surprise, and we truly value your contributions to the Innovate legacy." Legacy. Word hit like spit on a grave. Sarah stared at the folder without touching it. "Just to clarify," she said, her voice perfectly even, "no one from my actual department was consulted about this." Randall's jaw tensed. "The decision was made holistically, in collaboration with our workforce optimization team. And no warning," he glanced at the HR woman, clearly out of his depth. She jumped in with a pre-cooked line. "Aim to treat all team transitions with dignity and respect. Please know this decision isn't personal." Sarah smiled, but not kindly. "Then why does it feel like euthanasia?" Neither answered. She stood. They both visibly relaxed, probably thinking she was going to leave quietly. But instead, she leaned forward and placed both palms on the table, right over the folder. "I built the infrastructure you just migrated. I onboarded your clients, designed the automation you're now calling efficiencies, and not a single one of you thought to learn my name before firing me." Randall cleared his throat again. "Sarah, I know this is difficult." "No, you don't. You've never done a difficult thing in your life. You do sanitary things, paper things, spreadsheet things. You kill without looking." The HR rep opened her mouth, but Sarah was already walking out the door. She returned to her desk like a ghost, retracing its last moments. Coworkers, once friends, now cowards, peeked over monitors but said nothing. Even Jerome, the one guy she thought might give her a nod, kept his eyes glued to his screen like it held the secrets of the universe. She opened her bottom drawer, pulled out the small cardboard box she'd once used to carry her lunch in during crunch weeks. It still smelled faintly of Thai basil and hope. She packed slowly, methodically. not to drag it out, because she refused to rush for them. Mouse, mug, photos, the leather folio went on top. She walked the length of the office, box in hand, each step a reminder of what they'd erased in a 10-minute meeting. No one stopped her. No one said goodbye except one, Reese. He popped out of the break room with a protein bar in hand, looked at the box, and tilted his head. Oh, are you transferring to a new team or? She walked right past him. Didn't say a word. Need to? She was already sharpening the knife. Sarah sat at the kitchen table in her bathrobe at 2:17 p.m., blinking at the glow of her laptop like it might spontaneously generate purpose. Her hair was in the same loose bun she tied it into the night before, now lopsided and aching. The coffee had gone cold 2 hours ago, untouched. The tab open on her screen read Top 10 Resume Tips for 40-plus professionals re-entering the workforce. Wanted to throw the laptop through the window. The job boards were a graveyard. Each listing screamed the same quiet insult, looking for a hungry, fast-moving self-starter who thrives in chaos and wears multiple hats. She had worn all the hats backwards, sideways, upside down while juggling flaming swords. She had bled for hats. But now, they wanted hats on kids who knew how to design a pitch deck in Canva and thought Slack emojis were a management strategy. Clicked through page after page like she was scrolling her own obituary. At some point, the day outside shifted from gray to storm dark. Thunder rolled distantly. The soft ticking of the kitchen clock was the only sign that time still moved. She sighed and stood, heading for the cabinet where she kept the important adult paperwork, bills, health insurance, the occasional birthday card from her mom that still had glitter on it. She needed her 401k login info, thing about updating her rollover information, something about pretending her life was still progressing in a straight line. She dug through envelopes and folders, pulling out a few printouts of long-forgotten passwords, some tax returns, an old electric bill from 2011 that had no business still existing, and then she saw it. The leather. A rich, oxblood red, dulled from time, but unmistakably out of place among the drab paper world. Her fingers brushed it. She paused. The Innovate Solutions contract. She had forgotten it existed in physical form. It was heavier than she remembered, thicker, too, gold lettering still faintly etched on the cover. Dave had handed it to her in person, back when they were still operating out of a shared space above a failing yoga studio. He had insisted, "We don't do boilerplate here. I wanted something tactile, something real." Back then, she'd humored him. Now, she held it like a time capsule. Sat back down, opened the folio, and began to flip through the pages. It was all there: her job title, compensation package, early-stage equity options, long since converted to real shares, the original IP clause she'd once argued about with legal. Scribbled notes in Dave's handwriting in the margins. Fix this wording here. Add 10% more vesting there. Then she saw it. Section 9, Change of Control Provision. Her eyes stopped, froze. Read. In the event that Innovate Solutions, Inc. is acquired, merged, or otherwise absorbed by another entity, the employee shall be entitled to accelerated vesting of all outstanding equity, including unexercised shares, and a performance-equivalent bonus in stock if termination without cause occurs within 12 months of said change of control. This provision shall survive acquisition and supersede future at-will revisions unless individually waived in writing by the employee. Sarah's mouth went dry. She kept reading, faster now. Termination without cause, change of control, supersede future revisions. Her heart thudded once hard like a kick in the chest. She had never waived it. No one had ever asked her to, because no one had bothered to read it. Her brain went quiet. The air in the kitchen seemed to shift, like the walls were backing away, giving her room. She remembered Dave's voice, scratchy from late nights and bad bourbon, as he handed it to her that night. "Look, I know it sounds dramatic, but if this company ever gets bought out by some bloodless giant, I want you covered. You helped build this thing from nothing. You deserve to win, even if I'm not the one writing the checks." At the time, she had rolled her eyes and called him paranoid. He had smiled and said something she'd never forgotten. Sometimes paranoia is just knowing how the story usually ends. She looked down at the clause again, ran her finger across the words like they were written in Braille. 12 months. She had been fired less than 6 weeks after the merger finalized, and the contract was untouched, unwaived, unacknowledged by the smug suits who thought printing a new handbook could rewrite the past. A laugh escaped her lips, short, sharp, voluntary. They hadn't just fired her. They triggered the landmine she didn't even remember planting. Her despair cracked like old plaster, and something new started to seep through. Not hope, not yet, but something better, fuel. She closed the folder gently, smoothed her palm across the leather, and then slowly, ever so slowly, she began to smile. Not the kind you wear in office meetings or fake on video calls. A real smile. The kind that precedes a storm. Law office sat above a pawn shop, and below a second-floor Pilate studio, exactly the kind of place where real work happened, where reality hadn't been sandblasted into chrome and LED lighting. Sarah stepped into the waiting room, her leather folio tucked under one arm and a paper coffee cup in the other. The walls were a dull off-white. The air smelled faintly of toner and determination. No fake succulents. No "we are family" posters. Just a receptionist who didn't look up from her keyboard, and a ticking wall clock that made no apologies for time passing. Sarah had found the name through a friend of a friend, someone who said, "You don't need a lawyer, you need a weapon with a license to practice." That weapon's name was Felicia Greer. Felicia's office had no windows and no pretense. A wall of legal books on one side, a war zone of documents on the other, and a desk that looked like it had survived litigation, fire, and possibly a divorce. She wore a black blazer over a band tee and had the air of someone who didn't bluff because she never needed to. "Sarah Monroe," she said, standing and shaking her hand. Firm grip, dry palm, all business. "Heard you've got something interesting." "I think I do," Sarah said, placing the leather folio on the desk like it was a cursed artifact. Felicia opened it, flipped past the basics, and slowed the moment she hit section 9. Silence that followed wasn't awkward, it was reverent. After a solid 2 minutes of reading, Felicia sat back, raised one eyebrow, and let out a low whistle. "Well, damn," she muttered. "Who wrote this? John Grisham on a bender. Founder, Dave. He was eccentric." Felicia gave a single, delighted laugh. "This clause doesn't just hold up, it's a scalpel wrapped in legal Kevlar. They'd have to rewrite the Constitution to undo this. Has anyone from OmniCorp acknowledged it? No. Fired me using a generic termination letter. Didn't even reference my contract. They think it's void." Felicia tapped her pen against the desk, calculating something invisible in the air. "Okay, here's what this means. You were granted equity, fully vested, with a performance multiplier tied to company valuation at time of acquisition. Do you have the original share volume?" Sarah reached into the folder again and produced a copy of her stock grant certificate. Felicia pounced on it like a hawk, eyes scanning the figures. "Sweet mother of spreadsheets," she breathed. "The merger closed at $94.60 a share. You were holding 82,000 shares with a 1.5x performance trigger on early termination. That's," she paused, doing the math in her head, "that's over $11 million before taxes." Sarah blinked. It hit her like cold water to the face. Not severance, not hush money. Justice. Alicia leaned forward, the intensity in her eyes sharp enough to cut through drywall. "They owe you that payout. If we invoke this clause through the proper channels, they have to honor it or face a breach of contract suit that'll make their board's heads spin. And believe me, corporate boards hate two things: exposure and expensive mistakes." Sarah swallowed, but the fear was gone. Her hands were steady. Her pulse was slow. "What do we do first?" she asked. Felicia grinned. It was a fox's grin. "We hit them where it hurts. Not HR, not their mid-level damage control dorks. Straight to their legal department and the board of directors. We put the language in writing, tight, surgical, cold as hell, and let them marinate in panic." She pulled out a yellow legal pad and began writing like her pen was drawing blood. "Include clause reference, stock valuation, acquisition timestamp, termination notice, and full payout calculation. Demand fulfillment within 14 business days, or we file in federal court for breach and bad faith handling." Sarah watched the words take form like she was staring into the barrel of a loaded gun she finally knew how to fire. "Will they fight it?" she asked. "Oh, absolutely," Felicia said. "They'll try to intimidate you, lowball you, maybe even dig for dirt, but they have nothing. This contract is rock solid, and their ignorance of it only makes them look worse." Felicia paused, set her pen down, and looked Sarah dead in the eye. "You don't beg and you don't blink. You are not the victim here, you are the fuse, and they're about to find out how loud the bang is." Sarah exhaled, slow and controlled. The grief was gone. The humiliation had been replaced with something new, sharper, quieter, more dangerous. She hadn't just survived being fired. She'd been unleashed. As Felicia typed up the formal letter, each word a blade, Sarah sat back in her chair, legs crossed, sipping coffee that now tasted just a little sweeter. Let them come. Let them scramble. Let them realize too late that the woman they dismissed like an empty desk chair was walking back into the room, carrying a contract, a lawyer, and a fire she hadn't felt in years. Not to rebuild, but to collect. The letter went out on a Thursday. Sarah watched the clerk at the UPS store stamp the certified mail forms with dull finality. 7 envelopes total, each addressed to the highest ivory towers of Omnicorp. The chief legal officer, the general counsel, the board chair, and every other suited ghoul sitting between her and justice. The clerk asked if she wanted tracking numbers printed. She said no. She already knew where they were going. Back at home, the first thing she did was open her phone's contact list and search for every number tied to the company. Omnicorp HR, number that had sent the severance email, the office line from the building that used to house Innovate Solutions. She didn't delete them. She blocked them. Then she turned off her phone completely and slid it into a drawer with a dead Fitbit, a cracked USB drive, and the business card of her last dentist. She was done being reachable. The house was quiet in that eerie, late afternoon way. No sounds but the occasional groan of old floorboards and the hum of the refrigerator. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself exactly 1 inch of bourbon into a mug with her old company's logo, Innovate together, and stood by the window. It was raining, hard, sheets of water hitting the glass like applause. Her heart didn't race. Her hands didn't shake. There was no adrenaline, no spike of nervous energy. Just a heavy, serene certainty. The fuse had been lit. They just didn't know it yet. Somewhere in the heart of Omnicorp's legal machine, some intern or overworked associate was opening one of those envelopes, expecting another nuisance lawsuit or vendor complaint. Instead, they'd find a bulletproof letter on heavy stock paper, with clause numbers and timestamps and figures written so precisely they couldn't be argued. Felicia's tone had been surgical. The letter didn't beg. It didn't threaten. It reminded them of the contract their due diligence team had missed, reminded them that Sarah Monroe was not some severable limb. She was a living clause, a coiled spring they had snipped without checking the tension. The payout calculation sat dead center in the second paragraph, $11.73 million, based on share volume, trigger conditions, and post-acquisition valuation. Felicia had worded it cleanly. Per Section 9 of the enclosed contract, amount due to Miss Monroe is to be remitted in full within 14 business days. Noncompliance will initiate legal action under applicable breach of contract statutes. No emoji, no signature flourish. Just fact stacked on fact like bricks around a shallow grave. Sarah took a sip from her mug. The bourbon burned, but it was the good kind of burn, the kind that reminded you you're still alive. She hadn't told anyone. Not her former coworkers, not her friends, not even her sister. The silence was part of the power. Omnicorp wouldn't get to control the narrative this time. There'd be no rumors, no preemptive PR damage control. Just a single woman who refused to go quietly, and a storm building over their heads. They'd scramble soon, once the letters landed on the desks of men who wore $8,000 suits and valued disruption right up until the moment it disrupted them. Sarah imagined the VP, Randall or Raymond, or whatever that manila envelope mannequin's name was, getting called into an emergency meeting. His smug veneer cracking as legal explained how bad this was, how expensive, how avoidable. She imagined him saying, but she signed the exit paperwork, right? And some junior lawyer pointing out that no, actually she didn't, and she wouldn't, ever. That document now lived under a coaster, stained with coffee rings and irrelevance. Another sip, another clap of thunder. She watched water streak down the window like ink bleeding through bad paper. She wasn't scared anymore. That feeling had died the moment she saw Section 9. Now all she felt was focus, like her entire life had narrowed into one brilliant thread leading to a single, undeniable outcome. They had fired her thinking she'd vanish. A cost saved. A redundancy removed. What they didn't realize was that they'd activated her. No more meetings, no more small talk. No more being talked over in planning sessions by fresh hires who used ideate as a verb. Just time and silence. And the slow, creeping awareness, soon to dawn across every corner office, that the woman they'd dismissed was now standing outside their castle with a torch and a very old map. The letters were on their way, and the fuse was burning clean. The first voicemail came at 9:14 a.m. on Monday. Sarah didn't answer. Phone was still in the drawer, powered off like a corpse. But her email pinged instead with the subject line, urgent request to connect recent communication. It was from someone named Craig Eddington. Title: Executive Vice President, Strategic Risk and Compliance. Translation: Professional Fire Extinguisher. She opened the message, read the first line, "Hi Sarah, hope you're doing well," and audibly snorted. There was something truly deranged about a man who opened a damage control email with a wellness check. He went on to say he respected her long-standing contributions and wanted to have a constructive conversation to reach a mutually beneficial resolution. She closed the email without replying. By noon, her voicemail inbox was full. One from Craig again, this time without the cheer. "Hi Sarah, just looping back. It's important we touch base today, hoping to resolve this in a way that doesn't involve unnecessary escalation." Another from someone named Kara, in legal, using a tone that dripped with faux concern. "We just want to clarify some of the language in your letter. It's possible there's been a misinterpretation of policy that we'd like to walk through." And then came the one from Randall. Randall, the marble statue in a suit who'd fired her without blinking, now stammering through a voicemail like a freshman giving a book report on a novel he didn't read. "Hey Sarah, this is Randall Pierce. I wanted to personally, apologize if our previous meeting came across as, impersonal. I think there may have been some misalignment internally. Please give me a call back at your convenience." Sarah nearly dropped her coffee from laughing so hard. It was delicious. There it was, the sound of ego melting, panic tucked between syllables. The kind of corporate fear that smells like stale conference rooms and ruined bonuses. She could picture it all clearly. The emergency meetings, the red-faced execs, the PowerPoint decks with her name on the first slide and phrases like urgent liability exposure and unmitigated risk due to legacy agreements. Randall had become the sacrificial offering. The idiot who swung the axe and didn't notice the tripwire. Word was probably spreading fast. Some dusty old Innovate contract had detonated on impact, and no one had seen it coming. By 3:00 p.m., Craig called again. This time, Sarah answered. She sat on the couch, calm, cross-legged, a bowl of microwaved popcorn in her lap like she was watching a Netflix docuseries called Corporate Implosion, The Slow Death of Smug Bastards. "Sarah," Craig said, the forced brightness of a man trying to disguise fire behind his eyes. "So glad we could finally connect." She didn't return the pleasantry. "I wanted to speak person to person before things got too formal. We absolutely respect the documentation you've provided, and we're committed to finding a resolution that feels fair for everyone involved." She didn't say anything. Let him dangle. "We've spoken with our team, and based on the information we have, be prepared to offer a severance enhancement of, let me confirm, yes, $150,000 as a good faith gesture, assuming you'd be willing to sign a full release." Sarah chewed her popcorn slowly. Swallowed. "That's cute. Sorry?" Craig asked, caught off guard. "Your good faith gesture is about 1.3% of what you legally owe me," she said, deadpan. "So no, Craig, you don't get to call that an offer. Get to call that an insult with a comma in it." "Sarah," he said, the tone tightening, "I understand you may be upset." "Oh, I'm not upset," she interrupted. "I'm amused. You people didn't even read the fine print before cutting me loose, and now you're throwing monopoly money at the problem like I'm too dumb to notice." Craig exhaled, trying to regroup. "Look, we'd really prefer not to involve litigation. It's expensive. It's public. No one wins in that scenario." Sarah smiled. "Tell that to your board. My lawyer's name is Felicia Greer. You should already have her contact information. I suggest you use it." And with that, she hung up. No fanfare, no mic drop, just power, quiet, cold, and absolute. The next day, she got another voicemail. Same voice, same scramble. Only this time, Craig didn't offer money. He asked for time. Too late. She forwarded the voicemail to Felicia with a simple subject line. "Let the games begin." Started with a manila envelope, shoved through the mail slot like a ransom note. No postage. No courier. Just hand-delivered hostility. Sarah opened it on the kitchen counter, slicing the seal with the edge of a butter knife that suddenly felt far too small for the war she was in. The letter inside was 9 pages of weaponized legalese from Omnicorp's top-shelf law firm, a place with a name that sounded like a pharmaceutical for erectile dysfunction. Dresden, Halberstam and Lyle, LLP. The tone wasn't friendly. It wasn't neutral. It was full-on scorched earth. They accused her of violating confidentiality. They implied she had mishandled proprietary data. They stated, in bold font and full caps, that her termination may be reclassified as for cause pending internal review, which would nullify any rights to compensation under her prior employment contract. Final paragraph read like a hiss. If you or your counsel proceed with legal action, Omnicorp reserves the right to pursue counterclaims for breach of fiduciary duty, reputational harm, and willful misconduct. Sarah's breath caught. For a brief second, the paranoia crept in. Was this it? Was this where they turned it all to ash? She stood there in the kitchen, staring at the letter while the dishwasher hummed behind her like it didn't know the air had just changed. Her phone buzzed. Text from Felicia. They blinked. You're winning. Sarah called immediately. Felicia answered mid-chew. They're bluffing, she said through what sounded like a protein bar, classic corporate saber-rattling. They've got nothing and they know it. Sarah walked to the living room, the letter still in hand. They're claiming I violated confidentiality. They always do. It's boilerplate scare tactics. If they had something, they'd lead with it and skip the drama. But willful misconduct, Felicia scoffed. Please, if using your legally binding contract counts as misconduct, we're all going to jail for remembering things. They're just pissed they missed the clause, and now they're flailing. Sarah sat on the couch, the edge of the letter crumpling under her grip. Felicia's voice softened. They're trying to shake you, Sarah, that's all. You're making them bleed money and look incompetent. They need you scared so they can reset the table. Don't let them. Sarah nodded, more to herself than the phone. Going to keep coming, aren't they? Like rats in suits, Felicia said, but they don't know you've already built the flood. The next day, the emails started. Old coworkers, people she hadn't heard from in months, reached out with suddenly cautious tones. Hey, just heard some stuff floating around, are you okay? Omnicorp's legal team asked me if you'd ever been erratic. I told them no, obviously, but heads up. Someone from risk management called me, asked if you ever took client files home. They were digging, desperately, pathetically, trying to retrofit a reason to claim she'd always been a problem, painting her as unstable, unethical, disposable. The same woman who used to run sprint planning and client handoffs with a folder under one arm and a Red Bull in the other, now reimagined as a security risk with a grudge. It would have been laughable if it hadn't been so exhausting. At night, she couldn't sleep. Heart drummed in her chest like it was trying to claw its way out. She kept seeing that phrase in the letter, for cause, like a death sentence circling the drain. She drank more than she should, ate less than she wanted. But still, every morning she woke up and read Section 9 again, like scripture. 2 days later, Felicia called, almost giddy. Guess who just got suspended? Sarah blinked. Who? Your boy Randall, the guy who terminated you. Pulled off active duties pending internal investigation, which means they're prepping to feed him to the wolves. Sarah sat back in her chair, stunned. Already? Oh yeah, my bet. He didn't even know about the contract, which means now they're asking him, why didn't you do your job? Why didn't you flag the clause? Someone's gotta take the fall, and his neck's already in the noose. For the first time in days, Sarah smiled again. Not a smirk, not a performance. A real one. She was rattled, yes, tired, absolutely. But the ground was shifting and she could feel it. They had tried the charm. It failed, tried the money, it flopped. Now they'd tried fear, and she was still standing. A little bruised, maybe, but standing. And behind her, growing louder by the day, was the thunder of something big coming down. The call came at 8:03 a.m. on a Tuesday, just as Sarah was spooning instant coffee into a chipped mug that read #1 Project Witch. Gag gift from her team back when they still had inside jokes and reasons to smile. Her phone lit up with Felicia Greer. No text, no warning, just the call. Sarah stared at it for a second, then answered. Felicia didn't waste time, it's done. The words landed like a slow-building echo. Sarah didn't move. They've agreed to the full payout, Felicia continued. Every dollar. No settlement, no clause tweaking, no delay. Clean wire transfer scheduled for today. They folded, all the way down. Sarah leaned on the counter, the weight of it hitting her like a gentle wrecking ball. What changed? Board meeting last night, Felicia said. Legal laid out the math. You had them boxed in, contract airtight, paper trail clear, termination within the trigger window. Then someone finally asked the magic question. What happens if this gets out? Sarah could hear the smirk in Felicia's voice now. A shareholder lawsuit over gross negligence during a 9-figure acquisition. Whistleblower story that frames Omnicorp as a Goliath squashing one of its own. No PR strategy in the world saves them from that. You weren't a threat to their money, Sarah. You were a threat to their reputation. That's what finally did it. Sarah blinked, her vision blurred, not with tears, just static. The kind that comes after days of pressure finally lift and your body forgets how to carry itself without armor. And Randall, she asked. A short, satisfied pause, terminated, effective immediately. Official reason: failure to exercise due diligence in a high-liability personnel matter. Translation: he's the sacrificial lamb, and they tossed him without a second thought. Sarah sat down at the kitchen table, her knees suddenly remembering they were human. The sunlight broke through the slats of the blinds, cutting soft lines across the old laminate surface. Her laptop was already open. Reflex. She clicked into her bank portal. Waited. There it was. The number didn't look real, not at first. Just digits and decimals on a pale blue background. But then she saw the wire memo. Omnicorp transfer legal comp settlement Innovate equity vesting $11,731,822.40 no confetti. No trumpet sound, just a blinking cursor waiting for the next transaction. Sarah stared at it for minutes, for lifetimes. He didn't feel elated or greedy, or even victorious in the chest-thumping way movies try to sell you. She felt still, like the world had finally quit spinning just long enough for her to get her balance back. Her email chimed. Subject: you win. It was from Jerome, the one guy who couldn't look her in the eye when she packed up her desk. Just wanted you to know Randall got canned today. Everyone's talking about it. HR won't confirm. Rumor is the board found out he fired you without reviewing your file. That clause? Legend status. Drinks on me if you ever want to gloat. Hope you're okay. She closed the tab, took a long sip from the coffee in her cracked mug. It tasted awful, burnt, instant, exactly the same as it always had. And still, it was the best coffee she'd had in years. No speeches. No revenge speech into a mirror. No plan for what came next. Just her kitchen, $11 million, and a silence she had finally earned. She hadn't just burned the bridge. She'd paved the river underneath with gold. Appreciate you sticking around, you wise old rebels. Smash that subscribe button, or this fossil might just cause another epic fiasco.